Welcome back to my channel Celebuzz. Please share and subscribe and press the bell icon for new updates. Frank Fritz is no longer with us, but was it truly a mishap? A wave of shock is trembling the country as two of the most well-known American picker stars, Mike and Rick Harrison Wolf, are abruptly connected to an unheard-of scandal. In addition to being engaged in the unexplained demise of Frank Fritz, their lifelong buddy. But additionally, they were at the location where a night of fate. What actually took place, the backstage of America's most well-liked television program? A sudden tragedy? Or is a sinister plot gradually taking shape? Keep your gaze fixed on the screen. You will learn the truth about Frank's death. Shudder. Mike and Rick Harrison are indisputable. Frank Fritz, Wolf, and Wolf were a trio once, of tangible representations of a sentimental America, where the ostentatious is not what defines beauty, yet every rusted object, every lost tale throughout the years. A TV show, American Pickers, is more than that. Show, but a trip to bring back memories embraced by millions of viewers as a component of the collective memory. Between 2012 and the program peaked in 2016, with an average of each episode receives 4 million views, making Frank, Mike, and Rick are well-known faces on American television. They are depicted as rural men who revere the past, mythology, treasure seekers who prowl around the nation with the conviction that every item has a soul of its own. However, in a world surrounded by glistening stage lights, there is always light when there is gloom. Quick success changed Rick, Mike, and I went from being avid collectors to cold-blooded, cunning entrepreneurs who were constantly striving for a business empire. In the meantime, Frank, using his creative heart and a modest way of living, gradually become the outsider during the trip. He used to be its soul. Following season 7, fractures in the bond between the three emerged. An ex-crew member disclosed that Frank started to find it offensive to be branded. Although Mike and Rick kept growing their effect by constructing antique shops, creating franchises, and even establishing a platform for online auctions, Frank persisted in seeking the real each item's worth, something that made he was unique. Yet he also turned into a thorn, alongside his partners. Tensions simmered in the background. No meetings. Frank was longer. Public relations campaigns centered on Rick and Mike now. And Frank had walked every step of the way. Every laugh was now only a name omitted from the circle of strength. Lunches were served when Frank would be seated in silence in the vehicle. A crew member came forward. Nobody requested that he consume food. Nobody inquired about his well-being. He was alone. Additionally, that isolation was not confined to the rear. The scenes, the liquid poured onto the screen. Viewers with keen eyes started to observe the strange absence of Frank till in 2020, it vanished entirely. The History Channel icily declared that Frank was enjoying a personal vacation for medical reasons. However, the reality was much more acrid. From behind the apparently a fair explanation was a terrible one. The truth, Frank had been shunned by the family with whom he had been close. In a 2021 interview, Frank vehemently said, "I didn't get a call back. Nobody questioned me. I didn't belong to that family. No longer." It was a little line, but it sliced as a blade into the recollections of millions of fans who adored their sincere companionship. The companionship was not disrupted by a single incident, but rather by the outcome of long-simmering disagreements between values and financial gain, between loyalty and desire and enthusiasm as well as treachery. Mike and Rick created an empire. Frank only wished to preserve the unadulterated soul of commonplace tales. Additionally, when two routes don't longer converge, catastrophe is inevitable. When Frank Fritz silently vanished from TV screens in the beginning of 2020, the History Channel provided straightforward explanation. He was getting better, following extensive back surgery and the time required to heal. No press, no pictures conference, no goodbyes to devoted supporters. Almost like a curtain call, the announcement for a performer whose fans had not yet all set to say goodbye. Initially, the public felt pity. Everyone believed that Frank was merely taking a rest and will shortly return as he had done following earlier therapies. However, the months of years passed in solitude, and pity gave rise to distrust. An old acquaintance, for hundreds of episodes all at once, vanished into thin air. His Facebook account ceased to update, and his once bustling Instagram account vanished. Frank Fritz, who had shared each treasure hunt with great anticipation. Rick and Mike appeared to have vanished from the public eye. Even worse, according to lifelong pals they had been, I couldn't get through to him. Text messages, voicemails, and phone calls all fell on unresponsive ears. We made every effort, a former fellow student. However, Frank never did answer. He was not like that at all. If there were any indications of difficulty, they seemed to arrive too late. People close to him stated that in the months leading up to his absence, Frank often shown fear, even terror. He said he felt unsafe, was being followed, and his phone number kept changing. According to family, Frank had engaged a private investigator to examine his personal gadgets since they believed he was becoming infected. Then there was a chilly revelation. Frank concealed his finances, evidence that might have damaged the whole American Picker empire. Those records, including cash that was not disclosed, exchanges between Mike, Rick, and third parties, who were supported in many copies and concealed in safes in different places. Frank wasn't merely getting ready for a court case. Conflict. He was searching for a media outlet as well, platform powerful enough to convey the truth. Multiple sources attested to the fact that he'd made touch with two prominent investigating reporters, setting up a meeting for 14 July 2022 at a tiny coffee shop in Iowa, where he had spent a lot of time. Frank, however, never appeared. 24 after a few hours, neighbors started to notice oddities. The house's lights remained active throughout the night. The dogs were barking continuously. The mailbox was stuffed. A concerned friend dialed the police to verify. When the police dismantled the house appeared to be stuck in an incomplete moment. There was a meal left, incomplete, on the table. The telephone Frank was gone, but left on the couch without being noticed. There were no clear indications of illegal entry, but the little specifics, odd footprints on the scratches on the wooden floor, carpet, notably the hard drive that is gone, holding crucial documents, headed the authorities to ascertain that this wasn't a typical situation of a missing individual. This was a case that involves criminal aspects. However, for almost a year, the media stayed quiet. A comprehensive search was not conducted. No formal request from Mike, Rick, or the American Pickers squad. The quiet seemed as icy as though Frank had never existed. The family and some devoted friends kept looking for the glimmering hope. They made a $10,000 offer. Compensation for knowledge about Frank's whereabouts. A substantial amount for a middle-class family that continued to live. The conviction that he had persevered. It not until the beginning of 2024 did a video because of Rick's civil trial Mike Wolf and Harrison were leaked, that the country was genuinely taken aback. In the Rick's expression is filled with regret in this footage, sobbed and whispered, "We couldn't save him. We let him to die." An ambiguous assertion, but akin to a knife stabbed directly into the confidence of millions of those who formerly adored the well-known group. From a popular reality television program, now, American Pickers is enmeshed in the focus of the largest legal inquiry in the American people's history entertainment sector. The lost documents are verified to include evidence that might bring down the whole television and corporate sponsorship network of collaboration that Rick and Mike have been constructing for over 10 years. If when Frank had the opportunity to declare it, he could have changed the course of formerly a cultural icon program. Frank, however, never had that opportunity. He, a modest man with a creative spirit, was hushed for all time before the truth was stated. Additionally, in the eerie stillness, people started to speculate. Does this truly represent a vanishing or the destiny for a man who ventured to pose greed and strength? The evening of July 13th began within 2022. A dense, humid air mass descended upon a little town in Iowa. The streets were abandoned, with flickering streetlights through a thin fog that appeared to conceal something out of the ordinary. At the conclusion of Frank Fritz's little home on Franklin Street, the one-story house was as still as every other day. However, a series of events has started with irrevocable consequences. Frank's face was dotted with exhaustion, and his eyes were sunken from naught. I was sleeping and going through an old briefcase made of leather, within the financial paperwork, contract copies, and emails that are damning. To a third party, it could have been merely a collection of papers. Frank, however, saw it as proof. It was the reality. It was the last opportunity to reveal the shadowy side of a formerly celebrated as a brotherhood that endures. At approximately 8:02 p.m., traffic and CCTV footage from a home revealed two automobiles approaching the vicinity Frank's home. One was an SUV that was black. The another is an ancient Ford pickup. The authorization plates were subsequently determined to be owned by Mike and Rick Harrison Wolf. Silently, the two men left, their caps low, and strolled in silence, in the direction of the door. The headlamps were engines still warm, off. There was no shattered door, no indication of forced entry. This only had one possible meaning. Frank, he had opened the door. That instant marked the start of the end. The neighbor's camera footage was hazy but sufficiently clear to catch the two men's silhouettes standing in the entrance. Inside, the discussion started, in tense voices. Someone heard Rick's voice. First. Choked. Grunt. You believe you can't abandon us without making a payment? After remaining silent, Frank was noisy quiet. There is nothing I can do. I am unable to don't say anything. The room's atmosphere turned into suppressing. No scraping of seats, no glass clinking, only a hidden conflict between two men who had once referred to one another as brothers. Mike often, the one to calm, but this time only muttered, "We can manage this. Otherwise, Frank." However, Frank had left too far to go back. He articulated each word firmly. "I've forwarded the paperwork to another person. If something were to happen to me, everything will be." The trigger was exposed. Aloud, the boom was sudden and heavy. Subsequent examination of the sound revealed that it sounded like someone pushing a body against a solid surface, most likely the edge of a table made of wood. Frank was flung, his head striking the table's edge, and he was nearly instantly knocked out. There was no effort or emergency call to keep him alive. Mike and Rick are currently in a panic, took a more sinister route to eliminate traces and delete evidence. They cleaned up the blood and concealed Frank's remains in a room's corner, collected the silently departed with their briefcase. Nobody understood the true events that took place in that residence, aside from the single witness who was unable to concealment, the still runnable recorder. In the cold, following the battle, Rick's voice remarked in a quiet place, "No one can be aware of this. There is no way to return." The two vehicles departed about 9:15 p.m. in the darkness, successively, as they'd come. Later, a neighbor gave testimony that the vehicles he heard revving were not the sound of a tranquil departure, but instead of running away from the consequences. Fritz passed away by himself, without assistance, without a farewell. That a medical examiner verified severe head trauma, and the terrifying end, if within an hour he had been saved, the odds of surviving were more than 70%. However, their life had been taken from them by silence and a poor choice. After a few days, the home remained strangely silent. There was no answer on Frank's phone. The email was turned off. Family and friends expanded concerned. The sole individual who took action was the welfare of his sister, who demanded verify. As soon as the police arrived at the house, they discovered an incomplete meal, an odd open jar of spices, the hardwood floor's footprints, and Frank's entire absence. Everything indicated that Frank's disappearance, which was not voluntary, but of sexual assault. However, it took longer than 6 months before the truth came to light. It was a confession under duress from evidence, the legal system, and possibly his own residual conscience. On the 24th of May, Rick Harrison appeared in court in 2024. His breathing was labored, and his eyes were sunken. I pushed him, he muttered, bowing his head. Mike remained still. We allowed him to pass away. The trial found that there was more than one murder. Case, but a legend of reality TV, a greed-destroying friendship, a man murdered by treachery, and millions of those who thought their favorite show was warm and genuine. Now all that's left is resentment. Frank didn't simply lose his life that evening. He missed the opportunity to be safeguarded and trusted. Additionally, the world lost a man who thought people, legacy, and memories were valuable, maintaining with all of his heart. When Mike Wolf and Rick Harrison formally acknowledged their involvement in Frank after Fritz's passing, the whole nation was shook. It wasn't merely a surprise to the fan base for reality TV, but an earthquake that made the news platforms ranging from cable to print popular hashtags on the internet. That 42-second video started to play in the morning, disseminated over Twitter, at a rapid pace. In Rick Harrison, who was formerly renowned for his cunning grin, which was porn star's distinguishing feature, stood. His eyes were still on the courtroom. His voice was dejected. I gave him a shove. I didn't let Mike stop me. We permit Frank to proceed. Mike Wolf stood beside him and did not protest, simply nodded in silence, and shed tears, slipping down his weary and dejected face. In 4 hours, the number of #Justice for Frank cases had increased with almost 18 million followers on Twitter mentions. #porn stars are among the keywords. Mike Wolf, treachery, confession, and #Frank should have a more flooding TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Talk. Top stories channels such as the BBC, CNN, and others international media outlets halted their normal shows to broadcast urgent press accounts of this startling incident. Faces that had frequently appeared in millions of people's living rooms, the focus was now on American families. Criminal column headlines. As stated by a Reuters quick survey, 78% of participants expressed surprise and indignation at the disclosures. However, only 7% stated Rick and Mike's weakness caused him to act in ATO mental coercion. The reaction was more than just social media. In only 48 hours, over a dozen significant partners, ranging from vintage shops to publishing houses, declared their terminations. Walmart pulled out right away. Items with the names of all porn performers from its shelves. The History Channel released an urgent declaration. We've fired everyone, connections with the people engaged, and will examine our complete screening procedure. The outrage storm kept sweeping across digital platforms. Mike and Rick's private account viewed their subscriber counts fall. YouTube's official porn star channel, which previously claimed to have more than lost around 600,000 customers out of 1 million within 3 days. During the uproar, Frank, the relatives of Fritz, spoke up with a heartfelt memorial in their Iowa hometown, which attracts thousands of visitors. Frank had not been introduced to most of them in person, yet felt obliged to say their sorrow and indignation. The indications were reading all over. Frank, the last defender of our beliefs. Nobody is worthy of being deceived by such a friend. The memorial swiftly evolved into a gathering spot for sorrow, rage, and a longing for fairness. The movement known as Honor Frank was created, urging producers of reality TV to hold their personas to higher moral standards, norms. Within a week, more than. The petition was signed by 350,000 people. However, several supporters attempted to defend Rick and Mike, contending that monetary pressures from emotions or crises could have caused them to behave improperly. Some isolated posts even held Frank accountable for initiating the dispute. But the excuses were swiftly overshadowed by the public indignation and the indisputable legal proof. Media analysts right away sprang into action. The Rick Harrison, yet. The case of Mike Wolfe is more than a criminal trial. Cultural critic in a CNN program, Lawrence Steele, stated, "It is a representation of a culture that blindly believes media personalities and fails to recognize the actual individuals behind the photos that have been expertly modified." Dr. Samuel social psychologist Gray, who works at the ADD by the University of Chicago. The outcry demonstrates how the public feels profoundly deceived when watching personalities, particularly those who are designed to be liked, popular, and treacherous. That confidence. It hurts more than disappointment. It's a general outrage. Additionally, the controversy has caused a shakeup in the field of entertainment. Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime have revealed that their contract will be reviewed. Background checks and signatures for actuality is shown. A few states have even suggested new legislation to strengthen the moral requirements for contestants on reality TV. For Mike Wolfe and Rick Harrison, their former glory has dimmed. Vintage fairs have rejected their appearance as visitors. Community gatherings that formerly greeted them and have led their invitations. A museum dedicated to the history of Las Vegas, which formerly featured an exhibit called Rick Sponsored, has completely taken it down, swapping it out for a somber sign that closed forever. Now Rick and the greatest legacy left by Mike is no longer the unusual items they used to hunt, but a warning story about trust being violated and the terrible price of unbridled greed. This is more than just two people failing. Television personality, in addition to the last ring in a glorious era in the American reality's past TV. When Mike and Rick Harrison Wolfe had to show up in court and officially acknowledge, many people thought that the truth had finally surfaced. However, the events that followed showed a dark plot. Since Frank Fritz's passing was the very beginning of a frigid iceberg that had been concealed for years. Shortly following the first trial, the scope of the study quickly grew. Instead, rather than concentrating only on the cause of death, detectives started looking for a weak trail of forgery, financial fraud, and planned a cover-up. What was uncovered depicted a terrifying image of avarice, treachery, and a system that had been working under the shadows of the TV displays for longer than in years. The first emphasis was on the financial records pertaining to Rick and Mike. With forensic accounting professionals, a number of financial exchanges pertaining to projects that Frank Fritz had participated in investigated in detail. The outcomes were startling. Over $4.3 million had been moved to accounts located abroad, particularly in the Cayman and Bays Islands from 2015 till 2021. Unfortunately, when the show was at its peak, Frank didn't even know about the earnings, not to mention a portion of them. He also signed contracts that were changed, adding a lot of negative phrases. Certain signatures were even thought to be being made. Both handwriting and digital long-kept secrets were exposed by proof. The hardest hit was a hard drive, taken from the residence of Mike Wolf. It included several internal correspondence between Mike, Rick, and their legal representatives. The messages made it obvious that there was a strategy to take Frank out of important transactions, and even talked about managing the risks he posed. On June 12th, one email was sent, a month prior to Frank's passing in 2022, startled the public. If Frank also travels, we must permanently quiet him. The communication came from an internal secure account, however was located by a specialist in computer forensics ordered by the court. Concurrently, a crime scene examination, we went back to look at Frank's house and discovered evidence of a hurried crime scene tidy up. Industrial cleaning residues agents that are often solely utilized in medical situations were discovered on a variety of surfaces, near the coffee, beneath the wood floor table at which Frank is thought to have fallen. Technology for laser scanning discovered a blood stain that had been sloppy, sufficient to pass a standard examination, however, not a thorough forensic examination. The secret proof surfaced when specialists obtained a tape that lasted 17 minutes from the handheld recorder that Frank consistently carried. It included the last words of the dispute that proved fatal. Rick's tone was relaxing. "Frank, no one will discover you. You will be thoroughly cleaned." The audio recording became the focal point of the indictment, changing the case as a whole from mishap to attempted homicide. Even more startling, a fresh witness surfaced, previously a driver for Mike Wolf's business, exposing that the evening of Frank's disappearance, he had received instructions to transport a top-secret package to a Kansas City warehouse without any checks. Later, GPS data verified that Mike had arrived with his pickup truck just hours following Frank's passing. The last component of the puzzle started to come out. Mike and Rick had not only violated their friendship of many years, yet were also accused of scheming to get rid of Frank, who was the vitality of the television conglomerate they'd constructed together. The inquiry further revealed the covert coalitions behind the reality television sector. Numerous. The History Channel's executives were charged with failing to take action against anomalies as long as the display stayed lucrative. One veteran, the producer, was even suspected of using Rick's advice to prevent any controversies prior to their official release. Fury was growing. Millions of individuals on social media demanded a thorough reform of the reality television sector. According to surveys, 82% of Americans think the sector has grown too, accepting of immoral conduct without any kind of authority. However, more importantly, the most devastating is the death of Frank Fritz as a straightforward, honest man who liked America's small pleasures. He was deceived by his closest companion simply because he had the courage to defend fairness. Frank's passing is not merely an individual tragedy, it's a strong caution. When greed obscures morality, or friendship is worth millions of dollars, it's not just a life lost, it's a total breakdown of human faith. As stated by Nielsen experts, this is not merely an impromptu public response, but a definite indication of a moral waking up to a world without trust in return for phony glitz. Famous people that were once excited about investing a lot of money in characters like Rick, Mike Wolf, or Harrison are now turning behind them. Within a couple of days, numerous contracts worth millions of dollars were canceled in a cascading fashion. A boycott throughout the media landscape. One of the first companies to take action and swiftly remove every merchandise connected to Mike and Rick from their shelves, emphatically stating, "We put integrity first." The formerly well-known figures were taken out without hesitation. Vintage fairs that used to be jam-packed are now silent. The posters featuring Mike Wolf's face, formerly seen as the representative of the love of collecting, were conflicted fiercely throughout night. Rick Harrison's business associates have additionally subtly altered their tactics, removing themselves from the present notorious names. A surge of silence, but additionally, aggressive boycotts have proliferated among the fan base. DVDs and souvenirs that formerly regarded as treasures are now being disposed of and sold off, as though people wish to remove all evidence of their formerly ardent affection. But in the midst of there are still hints of rage thanks to Frank Fritz. All throughout the small stores in the U.S., carry pick for Frank. Activities, generating money to aid victims, the financial mismanagement and treachery of Have Faith. Frank's. In Davenport, Iowa locality, a mural was created using the heartwarming remarks, "Frank Fritz, custodian of stories that have been lost." The University of Additionally, Iowa offers a scholarship program. Grant for students majoring in his name in mythology and history, authentic to the principles that Frank upheld during his life. His relatives say that even though Frank was deceived by those who were close to him, his legacy will endure. As Rick Mike lost both their jobs and their wealth, the most valuable item they trust was lost. Something that isn't refunded through any kind of media campaign. No an apology can compensate. Nothing can repair the harm they have caused. What remnants of their heritage, formerly a vibrant, the pursuit of antiquities and history, is now a harsh reminder of the repercussions of treachery. When a reputation is established, it will fall apart on falsehoods and greed, quicker than any antique they previously treasured. Frank is an ordinary individual who wished to share experiences with America, is currently a new emblem, a sign of faith, deceived, and a sobering reminder of the cost when honor is given up for fame. The Rick and Mike tale is no longer catastrophe in one's own life. This serves as a caution to a whole civilization fixated on celebrity. It reveals the negative aspects of loyalty, glamour, aspirations, and a system that is decomposing gradually. Frank survived, due to a light-hearted disagreement on a summer evening. Because of his avarice, he was killed. Shattered friendships, as quiet was purposefully muted in place of he earned the apology. Frank was murdered by a framework that encourages self-interest over honesty. Additionally, whitewashing campaigns were started. Late, the harsh reality still stands. His demise wasn't a coincidence. It was unavoidable. The outcome of several minor errors gathered over many years, resulting in an irreparable catastrophe. The demise of Mike and Rick are a prime illustration of the timeless reality that celebrity may create an empire. Nevertheless, it can also destroy an individual's character in a moment. Lies, greed, and treachery lurk in the background awaiting an explosion. Frank might have been permanently silenced, yet his passing is a severe caution to a culture that reveres fake pictures. It serves as a reminder that behind each glistening grin on the screen, numerous untold stories exist, hidden areas that are never highlighted reaches. Additionally, when the media stops talking, still reverberating is one question. Was this only a haphazard misfortune, or a protracted intended plot? Maybe the solution lies deep inside Fritz Frank. If the public's only knowledge is just the beginning, how much more startling will be the secret that Rick Harrison is in hiding? Comment below with your comments, and remember to share, like, and join the channel to learn more about the facts that have never come to light. See you in the following section. Crushed friendships because quiet was purposefully muted in place of he earned the apology. Frank was murdered by a framework that encourages self-interest over honesty. Additionally, whitewashing campaigns were started. Late, the harsh reality still stands. His demise wasn't a coincidence. It was unavoidable. The outcome of several minor errors gathered over many years, resulting in an irreparable catastrophe. The demise of Mike and Rick are a prime illustration of the timeless reality that celebrity may create an empire. Nevertheless, it can also destroy an individual's character in a moment. Lies, greed, and treachery lurk in the background, awaiting an explosion. Frank might have been permanently silenced, yet his passing is a severe caution to a culture that reveres fake pictures. It serves as a reminder that behind each glistening grin on the screen, numerous untold stories exist, hidden areas that are never highlighted reaches. Additionally, when the media stops talking, still reverberating is one question. Was it a protracted or sporadic tragedy? Intended plot? Maybe the solution is hidden, deep with Frank Fritz. If everyone in the public understands is just the beginning, how the concealed portion will be far more surprising. That Rick Harrison is in hiding. Post your comments below. And remember to share, like, and join the channel to learn more about the facts that have never come to light. See you in the following section.